Frank Sullivan had spent 30 years in this garage. 30 years of grease-stained hands, of busted knuckles, and of long, quiet nights under the hood of a car, listening to the secrets its engine had to tell. He had built this place from the ground up, turning a small, forgotten town auto shop into one of the most trusted and most respected names in the entire city. Customers didn't just come here for repairs. They came because they knew that Frank, good old honest Frank, would not cheat them. They came because they knew he cared. But none of that mattered today. Because today, after 30 long and very loyal years, he was being thrown out. Like a piece of old, used-up garbage, Frank stood in front of the new boss's polished, expensive desk, a man whose hands had never known a single day of real, honest labor. The words, so cold and so casual, hit him like a physical blow. And as he walked out of that garage for the very last time, the place he had called home for 3 decades, he knew this was not the end. This was just the beginning of a new and very different kind of story. Before we dive in, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, My Truth Story, and share this story. Your support helps us to keep bringing these powerful, life-changing stories to you, not personal. The words hung in the air between them, a cold and very final insult. Frank felt a tightness in his chest, but he refused, with every last ounce of his pride, to let this smug, pampered little boy see it. He would not give him that satisfaction. Outside, in the cold gray light of the parking lot, the wind hit his face like a physical slap. His old, reliable pickup truck sat in the same spot it always had, but this time it felt different. He was not coming back. Frank threw his heavy and now very symbolic toolbox into the truck bed and got in. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, and just stared ahead at the endless and now very empty road. 30 years. 30 years of his life gone in a matter of minutes. He turned the key, the old familiar engine rumbling to life. And as he pulled out of that parking lot for the very last time, he had absolutely no idea what or who would come next. Frank drove 4 hours, with no destination, the city lights. A blurry, meaningless stream in his tired and now very old-feeling eyes. His hands stayed tight on the steering wheel, his knuckles a stark and very white, contrast to the grease that was permanently ingrained in his skin. 30 years in one single, solitary place, and now he had nowhere to go. The thought burned. In his chest, like a fire he could not put out. He had not just lost a job, he had lost his purpose. He had lost his home. When he finally pulled into the driveway of his small, simple house, the same house he had lived in for 20 years, the silence of it hit him with a new and very heavy force. There was no familiar, comforting sound of an engine that needed tuning, no rich, earthy smell of old oil and of hot metal. There was just emptiness. He set his heavy toolbox down on the small wooden kitchen table and sank into a chair, running his hands through his graying hair. He had never planned for this. He had always thought that he would retire from that garage, that he would perhaps train a new, younger generation of mechanics, that he would pass down the quiet and very real knowledge he had so painstakingly built over the course of his entire life. But Greg, with a few simple and very cruel words, had taken all of that away from him in a matter of seconds. The next morning, he woke up early, out of a lifetime of a deeply ingrained habit. But today there was nowhere to go. He sat at his kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, staring at his own calloused and now very useless hands. He had never done anything else. Then a thought, a small, fragile, and very desperate thought, crossed his mind. He grabbed his phone and began to scroll through his contacts. There had to be someone, some other shop, some old friend who needed a good, honest mechanic. One by one, he began to make the calls. One by one, he got the same polite and very final answer. Sorry, Frank, we're not hiring. Budgets are tight right now. We'll be sure to keep you in mind. That afternoon, he drove around town, stopping by every single auto shop he could find. Some places had kids, barely out of high school, working the bays. Their movements quick, but their eyes empty of any real and very deep understanding of the machines they were working on. Others had owners who looked at his age, at the gray in his hair, and saw not a lifetime of an invaluable experience, but a liability. Hours passed, and the hope, the small, fragile hope he had woken up with, began to drain from him with every single and very polite rejection as he sat in his truck. Outside the last and most pathetic-looking shop on his long and very discouraging list, something caught his eye. It was a small, run-down garage on the very edge of town, a place that looked as if it had been abandoned for years. But Frank recognized the name on the faded, peeling sign. It had once belonged to an old mechanic he used to know, another old-timer who had been around for just as long as he had. He pulled into the empty, weed-choked lot, a strange new kind of curiosity now tugging at him. The building looked abandoned, but the front door, he noticed, was unlocked. Inside, the place was a mess. A thick layer of dust covered everything. Broken down, skeletal cars sat like the ghosts of a forgotten era, and the air was thick with the smell of neglect. It looked as if no one had worked here in years. And then, a new and very different idea, an idea that was as terrifying as it was exhilarating, began to spark in his mind. He had spent 30 long and very loyal years of his life building someone else's business. Maybe it was finally time for him to build his own. He could feel it deep in his bones. This place, this place had history, the kind of history that could not be bought but could only be earned. For years he had poured his own sweat, his own blood, his own soul into making Greg Miller's shop the best in the entire town. And where had that gotten him? It was tossed aside, forgotten, but this place was different. Frank walked to the massive sliding garage door, and with a grunt of a pure physical effort, he shoved it open. The bright, hopeful sunlight streamed in, illuminating the thick, lazy clouds of dust that were swirling in the air. And he could almost see it. He could see the way it could be. The cars lined up outside, people bringing their beloved vehicles to someone they could truly and deeply trust. A mechanic who would not cheat them. His own shop, he thought. The powerful and very beautiful thought made his pulse quicken. But then a cold, hard wave of a very real reality settled. The place was a wreck. The equipment was outdated. The main lift was rusted, and who knew if the wiring even worked anymore? It would take more money than he had, more money than he could ever hope to get, just to get it up and running. And then there was the biggest and most insurmountable problem of all, the customers. How could he possibly get people to trust a new, run-down shop when Greg's own, very slick and very modern business had a chokehold on the entire town? He stepped outside and saw an old, beat-up pickup truck, a truck that was almost as old and as tired as his own, climbing out of it. The man was old, his clothes were worn, and his face was a weathered and very familiar roadmap of a long and very difficult life. And Frank recognized him instantly. Tom Reed. Frank hadn't seen him in years, but he had once been a legend in the local and very small world of auto mechanics. He had owned his own, very successful shop back in the day, a place that people had driven for miles just to visit because they knew that he, Tom Reed, was the best. Frank, as a young and very green mechanic, had learned a lot just from watching him work, and in that moment something shifted in Frank. He had been so lost in his own, very personal and very painful sense of a betrayal that he had forgotten about the one single thing that had always mattered the most. He had forgotten about the people, the real and very loyal people of his town. And just like that, a spark was lit. For the next few long and very difficult days, Frank and Tom got to work, and word, as it always does in a small and very close-knit town, began to spread. A few of Frank's own, very old and very loyal customers started to stop by, their own faces a mixture of a deep and very real curiosity and a new and very hopeful kind of a support. They watched as he worked, and they remembered. They remembered why they had trusted him, and him alone, for so many long and very loyal years. And then one bright, beautiful morning, a woman pulled up in a minivan, her own face tense with a very real and very familiar worry. "I heard you were open," she had said. "My car, ... It's been making a terrible noise." But Greg's shop. It told me it would take 2 long and very expensive weeks just to even look at it. Frank had just nodded. "Pop the hood," he had said. And within a matter of minutes, he had diagnosed the issue. A loose belt. A simple 10-minute fix. When he had handed her the keys back, she was stunned. "Greg told me I needed a full and very expensive engine repair," she had said. "He was going to charge me hundreds." Frank had just wiped his hands. "On a rag, you're good to go," he had said. "Well, there's no charge for something that small." Her own eyes had filled with a profound and very real gratitude. "I am telling every single person I know about this place," she had said, and she did. Within hours, more cars had started rolling in. People came in with their own very similar and very ugly stories about how Greg had so casually and so consistently overcharged them, about how he had pushed them into a series of completely and utterly unnecessary repairs. And Frank and Tom, they had worked tirelessly, fixing the cars honestly and fairly. The trust, the real and very beautiful trust, was coming back. Tom exhaled. A long, tired, but very satisfied sound. "He's not done yet," he said, his eyes fixed on the car across the street. Frank just nodded. He knew Greg too well. This was just the beginning. The next morning, Frank arrived at the shop early, his mind still on the car that had been watching them, a silent and very real threat in the darkness. He had a feeling, a deep and very cold feeling in the pit of his stomach, that this was far from over. As he stepped inside his new and very fragile sanctuary, a new and very different kind of determination settled over him. Greg could try to scare them. He could try to break them. But he would not win. The front door was wide open, and his heart, which had been so full of a new and very hopeful purpose, now dropped into his stomach. Tools, many of them Tom's own. Cherished antiques were scattered everywhere as if a tornado had ripped through the room. The drawers of the main workbench had been yanked open, their contents dumped onto the floor. The new and very expensive diagnostic machine they had just purchased had been smashed, its screen a spiderweb of a cracked and very dead glass. And his toolbox, the one he had owned for 30 long and very loyal years. The one that held not just his tools, but the very story of his entire life, was gone. Tom ran in behind him, stopping dead in his tracks. "No," he whispered, his own face, the face of a man who had seen too much of the world's ugliness already. Now tightening with a new and very real rage, Frank clenched his fists, the knuckles white, the grease in the lines of his skin a stark, dark contrast. He knew with a certainty that was as cold and as hard as the concrete floor beneath his feet, exactly who had done this. Greg. It was the only explanation. Greg had seen their new and very successful shop rising from the ashes. He had seen his own, once loyal customers leaving his own, very slick garage to come here. He had warned Frank that he would not last. Now, this Tom was fuming. "So we just ... we just let this go?" he asked. Frank looked around at the destruction, at the shattered remnants of their new and very fragile dream, his own chest heavy with a new and very real despair. "No," he said, his own voice a quiet and very powerful whisper. "No, we will not. Let this go." By noon, word of what had happened had spread through the town, and the people, the real and very decent people of the town, began to arrive. They came with their own tools. They came with their own brooms, with their own dustpans. They came with their own quiet and very powerful sense of a shared and very righteous outrage. One woman, an elderly woman named Mrs. Carter, crossed her arms and said, her own voice a firm and very final sound, "Greg did this, didn't he?" Frank didn't have to confirm it. Silence was enough. People whispered, their voices a low, angry murmur, as they began to clean, to organize, to rebuild. A few of the younger men. The very same men who had once been so afraid to meet Frank's eye in his old garage now stepped forward. "We are not letting him get away with this, Frank," one of them said. "We will help you rebuild." Frank's own throat tightened with an emotion so powerful it almost overwhelmed him. He had spent 30 long and very loyal years of his life working for a company that had tossed him aside like he was nothing, and now, after just a few short and very difficult weeks of being on his own, the real and very decent people of his town were standing up for him. By the end of the day, the shop was cleaner and more organized than it had ever been. Someone had donated a new and even better set of tools. Another had dropped off a new and very modern cash register. The town, in a single, beautiful, and very powerful voice, had spoken. Greg Miller had tried to destroy them, and instead he had only given them more strength. The lesson from this story is a powerful one. Integrity and real, honest, hard work will always, in the end, win. Frank had dedicated 30 long and very loyal years of his life to his work, only to be discarded without a single, solitary second thought. But instead of giving up, he had stood his ground. He had rebuilt himself, and he had, in the end, earned the deep and very real respect of an entire town. His journey proves that when you do the right and decent thing, people will notice, and they will support you in ways you never could have expected. Greg, on the other hand, had thought that his power and his greed would protect him. In the end, he had lost everything, not because Frank had fought him, but because his own, very ugly dishonesty had finally, and with a great and very beautiful sense of a cosmic and very real justice, caught up with him.